The sound of the waves crashing against the ships and the whisper of the wind carried a tension that was almost palpable. On the horizon, the silhouettes of the drakes appeared like menacing shadows, their red and black sails flapping like war flags. The city surrounded by the Viking siege awoke to the sound of chaos, its inhabitants rushing to fortify the walls and hide their provisions. For the Vikings, this was not just a battle, but a demonstration of power and strategy. While some warriors sharpened their blades, the leaders studied every detail of the enemy defense, watching for vulnerable points like hawks on the lookout. Amidst the hustle and bustle, the leader of the attack stood firm, observing the scenario as if he had already won the battle in his mind. It was not just about forcing an entrance, it was a game of patience, of waiting for the enemy to give in to the psychological pressure. Imagine the dilemma of the inhabitants, seeing their escape routes blocked, their supplies running out, and the looming shadow of invasion. To them, the sound of the Viking horn in the distance seemed like a harbinger of doom. This siege was as much about physical domination as it was about mental subjugation, weakening the city from within before the gates were even breached. And there was something almost choreographed about the way the Vikings moved. They weren't just raiders, they were natural strategists. From the positioning of their watchtowers to the timing of their attacks, everything was calculated. Archers took up strategic positions, while shields formed insurmountable barriers. And while the city might have seemed strong at first glance, the Vikings knew that a castle's strength lies not only in the stones of its walls, but in the courage of those who defended them. But who could have predicted what would happen when the siege reached its climax? The town, called Skjoldheim, was a symbol of resilience and prosperity in a challenging land. Its name, which means home of shields in the Old Norse language, reflected both its geography and the spirit of its inhabitants. Situated in a valley protected by mountains and with access to a strategic river, Skjoldheim thrived as a trading post between neighboring lands and even overseas. Its high, well-built walls not only protected the people from invaders, but also represented the pride of a community that saw itself as untouchable. The town was famous for its production of rare metals, particularly silver, a resource that attracted attention like honey attracts bees. The people of Skjoldheim had a rich and diverse culture, shaped by the fusion of local traditions and the influences of merchants who traversed their trade routes. The streets were filled with skilled artisans, their hands capable of creating everything from delicate jewelry to powerful weapons. The central market throbbed with life, where a cacophony of voices could be heard offering spices, fabrics, and even legends. One of the most celebrated festivals was Daga Helga, the Day of the Shield, when the entire city came together to renew its vows of unity and strength. Yet this very festival, which celebrated Skjoldheim's fortress, was an ironic reminder of its vulnerability. The Vikings' attack was not just about wealth or glory. Skjoldheim had become a thorn in the side of their expansionist plans, a trade barrier that challenged their supremacy. Furthermore, rumors had it that the city's leaders had refused to pay tribute to the Viking clans, an affront that could not go unnoticed. For the Vikings, allowing Skjoldheim to flourish without submission was a sign of weakness, something unacceptable in a society that lived for steel and prestige. Thus, the siege was not just an opportunity for plunder, but a matter of honor, a settling of scores to remind everyone who truly ruled these lands. The name Ivan the Bold echoed among the Viking clans as a fearless warrior and natural strategist. Born into the Revneska clan, whose insignia was a black raven on a scarlet field, Ivan carried the weight of a legacy from birth. The clan was known for its bravery in naval battles and for a code of honor that demanded absolute loyalty to community and glory. Ivan grew up listening to stories of his ancestors, such as that of Skjoln the Seer, who foresaw a great storm and led the clan to a decisive victory. It was no wonder that, In the eyes of his people, Ivan was more than a leader. He was the embodiment of legend, the link between the glorious past and the uncertain future. The culture of the Ravnaska clan was deeply rooted in the symbolism of the raven, associated with Odin, the god of wisdom and war. Their rituals often involved offerings to Odin, asking for guidance before battle or protection on dangerous journeys. In times of peace, the clan members were skilled fishermen, blacksmiths, and traders, but they never let their guard down. The children's education was rigorous, with weapons training beginning early and epic stories told around the campfire to teach strategy and courage. For Ivan, this environment shaped a restless spirit and a sharp mind. He always sought more than survival. He wanted to conquer and expand, not just land, but also knowledge and influence. Ivan's goals were clear but complex. He was no ordinary raider, driven solely by greed. His attack on Skjoldheim, for example, was not just a military move, but a strategy to consolidate power in a key territory. Ivan saw rule as a game of chess, where every move had to be meticulously planned. He believed that control of Skjoldheim would pave the way for new trade alliances and strengthen Ravnaska's position among the Viking clans. Yet there was something deeper at play. Ivan wanted to create a legacy that would be remembered for generations, a name that would become immortal in the chants of the Skalds. This ambition, however, set him on a path fraught with challenges and difficult choices, where each victory exacted its price. Before marching to Skjoldheim, the Ravnaska clan had already accumulated a series of legendary feats that cemented their reputation among the Vikings. One of the most remarkable moments in their history was the Battle of Myrkjord, an ambush against a rival army that had plundered villages under Ravnaska's protection. Led by Ivan's father, Bjorn the Wise Raven, the warriors sailed under the cover of darkness, taking advantage of the thick fog that covered the fjord. With silent boats and impeccable strategy, they surprised their enemies while they slept, turning what seemed like a suicide mission into a resounding victory. It was in this battle that the clan adopted the tactic of fighting with blades painted black, a gesture that mixed pragmatism and psychological terror, since their enemies could barely see the blows coming in the darkness. Another notable event was the siege of Frostvik, a small fortress surrounded by ice and snow that withstood Ravnaska's attacks for weeks. The siege tested the Vikings' physical and mental resilience, as they faced bitter cold and hunger. Ivan, then a young warrior, stood out by proposing a bold tactic. Instead of storming the walls, he suggested blocking the fortress's only water source, forcing the defenders to negotiate. The strategy was risky but effective. After 10 days of deprivation, the Frostvik leaders opened the gates in exchange for clemency. This victory not only solidified Ivan's position as a promising strategist, but also gave the clan control of an important trade route. The history of the Ravnaska clan, however, was not all glory. A dark chapter was the defeat of Vargstein, where the clan was betrayed by a longtime ally. Convinced to fight in unfamiliar territory, the Vikings fell into a deadly trap, losing many warriors and almost their entire fleet. Ivan, who had survived thanks to his skill at improvisation, bore the physical and emotional scars of this event. He swore that he would never trust alliances blindly, and that every move would be calculated with precision. This oath shaped not only his strategies, but also the character of the clan, which became more reserved and cautious in its endeavors. These battles, full of learning and sacrifice, paved the way for the campaign in Skjoldheim, where Ravnaska's fate would be tested once more. The first day of the siege of Skjoldheim was a meticulous dance between planning and action, with every move made by Ivan's clan calculated to unsettle the defenders. Since dawn, Ravnaska's warriors had been on the move. Their scouts, agile as wolves, explored the city's surroundings, mapping out vulnerable spots and observing the guards' routines. Ivan knew that winning at Skjoldheim would not be a matter of strength alone, but of intelligence and patience. He divided his forces into specialized groups, one team dedicated to sabotage, another to building temporary fortifications, and a third detachment that would maintain an overt presence to distract the defenders. Preparation began with the setting up of camps in the surrounding woods, carefully hidden from view of the city. The Vikings erected wooden barricades to protect their positions and dug trenches to prevent surprise attacks. Ivan, ever vigilant, stationed archers on the highest points, ensuring a wide view of the terrain. Meanwhile, the clan's blacksmiths worked tirelessly, sharpening blades and preparing poison-tipped arrows, a rare and effective weapon that could turn the tide of a protracted battle. Ivan's war council had emphasized that the first day should not be about brute force, but about testing the enemy's limits. Strike where they least expect it, he had said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The primary objective of the initial assault was clear: to cut off Skjoldheim's supply lines. Ivan knew that the city depended on a spring to the south and on caravans from the north. Under cover of night, small groups of Vikings closed in on the supply routes, cutting down trees to block paths and poisoning nearby streams. At the same time, saboteurs infiltrated the outskirts of the city, setting fire to small grain stores and causing panic among the residents. These initial attacks were designed not to destroy but to confuse, forcing the defenders to make mistakes that would be exploited in the days to come. As the second day dawned, Ivan felt that the first piece on the board had been moved, and now he waited to see the response of the inhabitants of Skjoldheim. On the second day of the siege of Skjoldheim, Ivan knew it was time to step up the pressure. The first direct attack by the Ravnaska clan would not be a major battle, but a psychological blow, a way to sow fear and doubt in the hearts of the inhabitants and defenders. Ivan decided to launch a small group of warriors during the night, so that the terror would spread like wildfire. These warriors would be few in number, no more than 10, but their impact would be profound. They would be painted black from head to toe with tribal designs, and their eyes would be outlined in white paint, creating a ghostly appearance, a spectacle of terror for anyone who came across them. The mission was clear: infiltrate the narrow streets of Skjoldheim, cause disturbances, and create a sense that the enemy was everywhere, even when they were not. They would move swiftly and silently, destabilizing the city without actually fighting. During the night, as fog covered the streets and icy winds blew in from the mountains, Ivan's small band crept forward. On every street, they broke down doors, set fire to small warehouses, and above all, left marks on walls and doors, runic symbols and claw marks that seemed to come from supernatural beings. Their goal was not to steal or destroy on a grand scale, but to create a sense of unseen pursuit. As the Vikings moved through the city, their ghostly presence left a trail of panic. The muffled screams of civilians awakened by the sound of doors breaking echoed through the night, amplifying the feeling that the city was surrounded by an invisible enemy, an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and that could do nothing to drive it away. When the attack was over, the band retreated silently into the woods where they had been camped, leaving the citizens of Skjoldheim in a state of confusion and terror. By dawn, Ivan knew that the effects of that small psychological attack would spread quickly, leaving an already vulnerable city even more susceptible to the next phase of the siege. On the third day of the siege, tension on the battlefield reached its peak. Ivan, immersed in the complexities of the siege, had planned this moment as a direct confrontation. His goal was clear: to test the true resilience of Skjoldheim's defenders, to show them that the Viking offensive was not only psychological, but also lethal. The mood was tense, the air heavy with anticipation, and the sounds of the waves crashing against the rocks formed a somber backdrop to what was to come. The sharp northerly wind promised a day of bloody battle, and Ivan was ready to lead his troops into action. The attack was meticulously coordinated. Before dawn, the warriors of Revneska prepared for the clash. Ivan gathered his commanders and gave them precise instructions. The strategy was simple but bold: to concentrate the main force at the eastern gate of the city, where the defenses were believed to be weakest. A second line of attack was prepared along the northern wall, while a reserve force stood ready to intervene should the defense prove stronger than expected. The Viking leader knew it would not be easy, but he felt the need to take the fight directly to the city walls to force a break in the morale of the inhabitants. Ivan's group advanced silently, under the cover of darkness, their sharp spears and swords gleaming in the moonlight. They marched in formation, like a storm about to break loose, each step more steady, each movement more calculated. As they approached the eastern gates, the tension grew. The city had been silent until then, as if waiting for an inevitable blow. And then, at Ivan's signal, the Vikings advanced, breaking the silence of the night with the sound of their war cries. The attack had begun. Ivan's force was initially successful in its charge, managing to breach part of the barricade defending the eastern gate. The first line of defense, composed of armed civilians and poorly-trained militiamen, was unable to hold back the Viking onslaught. Ivan and his warriors attacked with ferocity, taking advantage of surprise to reach the inner walls of the city. However, as the Vikings began to enter, the true resistance was revealed. Suddenly, a hail of arrows tore through the air, striking the Vikings with deadly accuracy. The well-trained and organized Skjoldheim defense forces reacted quickly and in a coordinated manner, retreating to strategic points and resisting the advance. The battle became a fierce struggle for the city gates, with the Vikings trying to force their way in while the Skjoldheim defenders clung to the last line of defense. Amidst the chaos, Ivan's men advanced in a coordinated movement, forming a barrier with their shields, trying to block the arrow attacks. But they soon realized that Skjoldheim's true strength lay not only in its walls and arches, but in the unshakable courage of its warriors. Even under pressure, the defenders showed a resilience that Ivan had not expected to encounter. Although the attack was brutal and violent, Ivan's clan suffered few losses. Their skillfully wielded shields protected their bodies from arrows and direct hits, and the Vikings' cunning allowed them to avoid most of the damage. Even so, the price was high. Some casualties were inevitable, and the cries of pain of some of their men mingled with the sound of the battle. The fallen warriors were quickly carried to makeshift medical camps, where healers tried to salvage what they could. Ivan, seeing his wounded men, felt a pang in his chest, but he had no time for lamentations. The battle continued, and victory was still far away. Meanwhile, the battle intensified. Skjoldheim's forces, although outnumbered, were fighting with fierce determination. Ivan realized that his warriors could not simply wait for victory. They needed to storm the walls, and that required more than just brute force. As the Vikings approached the inner gates, the defense became increasingly difficult to break through. The siege, which had seemed easy at first, now became a test of endurance for both sides. As the hours wore on, the siege grew bloodier. Despite the fierce resistance, Ivan knew he could not give up. At one point, the offensive was halted by a familiar cry. A messenger from Ivan arrived with news that the defense line at the north gate was about to collapse. The Viking leader quickly made the decision to redirect his forces, sending a small group to reinforce this position while the rest continued to fight for the eastern gates. The division of forces proved effective, as the defenders began to scatter, trying to respond to multiple attack fronts. However, as the battle intensified, Ivan began to realize that, despite his numerical advantage and fierce leadership, Skjoldheim was not as close to falling as he had imagined. The city, with its unusual resistance, showed that the resilience of a united and determined people should not be underestimated. So while the Vikings fought with all their might, Ivan knew that this battle would be just one part of something much larger. Ivan's clan had suffered minimal losses, but the psychological toll of the battle was clear. The people of Skjoldheim, despite their disadvantage, fought with courage, and that made Ivan's victory all the more difficult to achieve. As the day drew to a close and night began to fall, the siege was still far from over. Ivan knew that this attack, while not decisive, had begun to break the city's resistance. The real test would come in the coming days. But now, as the cold north winds blew across the front line, Ivan watched his warriors with a look of renewed determination. The battle was still only just beginning. On the fourth day of the siege, a horrific turn of events struck Ivan's clan, which had so far faced battles with courage and audacity. The city's forces, in a desperate and coordinated effort, managed to locate and attack the Viking camps in the dead of night. The sounds of war trumpets echoed across the hills, and the city, which until then seemed to be surrendering to the siege, finally showed its strength. Ivan, however, was unprepared for the fury that would befall his men. Suddenly, the silence of the night was shattered by the sound of swords and war cries. The battlefield, which had previously seemed a place of strategy and control, was transformed into a scene of chaos, where every shadow could be an enemy and every movement imminent death. Ivan's men, always prepared for battle, were taken by surprise. The city's forces, more numerous and better armed, attacked with desperate ferocity, as if their very survival were at stake. Each man of the Viking clan, who had once been a pillar of strength and courage, now faced the fury of an enemy determined to reverse the siege. Sharp blades sliced through the air with precision, and the sound of metal on metal echoed like a fatal warning. Ivan and his warriors fought with the last of their energy, but the sheer number and striking power of the city's forces soon became insurmountable. The ground, covered in mud and blood, witnessed the fall of each of his brothers, who fell silently, their empty gazes turned to the sky. The battle, which lasted for hours, left no room for victors. When the sun finally rose, the battlefield was filled with the silence of death, with the bodies of 80% of the clan scattered across the ground, as if fate itself had severed their ties to life. Ivan, with his 11 remaining men, was faced with a devastating reality. With every step he took, he felt the weight of the losses, as if his soul was being ripped out along with each life lost. He looked at the bodies of his warriors, who were more than just men in battle. They were his friends, his brothers in arms, those who shared his beliefs, his culture, and his life. There was no time for mourning, but inside Ivan, feelings of despair and anger boiled. As a leader, he knew he could not fail, but the pain of seeing his lineage almost extinct was unbearable. With each moment, he felt the weight of being the last remnant of a clan that, until then, had promised to conquer the world. But in the end, only he and his 11 men remained. Ivan's gaze, once determined and full of confidence, was now marked by loss, by tragedy. Even so, there was something inside him that urged him to continue. As if, in those last moments, the Viking spirit, the strength of his clan, still lived within him. And with that remnant of hope, Ivan stood up, ready to fight to the end, not only for survival, but for the memory of all those who fell in that battle. In the aftermath of the devastating battle, Ivan was faced with a decision that pierced his soul like a sharp blade. His clan, reduced to just him and 11 men, was weakened, but the will to take revenge, to regain control and to repay the suffering was stronger than ever. The heat of loss burned within each of them, but the coolness of a seasoned leader spoke louder. This is not the time, Ivan thought, despite the fire that consumed him. He looked around at his remaining warriors, men who had shared all the pain and glory of the previous battles. Their eyes were empty, but there was still a gleam of determination in them. However, there was no room for recklessness. Ivan knew that the strength and spirit of his clan were not enough to face the city in its current condition. The city could have won a battle, but the war was not yet decided. The retreat was made in a calculated and silent manner, like a wounded animal that retreats to regroup and attack later. Ivan's men, exhausted and with the weight of loss on their shoulders, followed their leader through the winding, dark forest trails that led them away from the battlefield. Ivan ordered them to move in silence, knowing that any mistake could mean the end for what was left of their clan. The cloudy, gray sky seemed to reflect the atmosphere of desolation that gripped each man's heart. There were no words, only the sound of cautious footsteps, the wind carrying a presentiment of revenge. The battlefield, now distant, still echoed in their minds. But this was no time for lamentations. It was time to reorganize, to plan, to strengthen themselves. With the camps far away and silence taking over the place, Ivan and his men finally settled into a new hiding place, a place where they could recover and, more importantly, plan their next move. It was a strategic pause, a breather in the midst of a storm. Ivan knew that this retreat was not a sign of weakness, but rather a preparation for something greater, something more brutal. He gathered his men and, in a low but firm tone, explained the need to wait. The city had underestimated his power, but he would not do so again. Ivan was determined to make the city pay for what it had done. But this would be a different kind of attack. He would not be reckless. He would not let anger blind his actions. It would require patience, precision, and above all, strength. And in time, the city would feel the wrath of Ivan's Viking clan. But for now, he would have to bide his time. The final act of the siege was about to take place, and Ivan felt the weight of every step he took. The sky, dark and threatening, seemed a reflection of the dark spirit that took over his being. The loss of so many friends and allies was still fresh in his mind, but the ardor of revenge was now being replaced by a deeper, almost reverent feeling. It was time for Ivan and his men to prepare for the final blow. But before moving forward, something else was necessary. An offering to Odin, the god of gods, the lord of winds and storms, the one who controlled the destinies of the warriors. In silence, in a secluded place, Ivan led his men in a simple but meaningful ceremony. The 11 remaining warriors were gathered around a fire, their expressions determined but also reverent, as if they knew that, at the end of this ritual, Odin's fury would guide them or punish those who dared to challenge the greatness of the Norse god. With stones and sticks, Ivan drew a circle around his small company, and a makeshift altar was formed. In the center, they placed their weapons as offerings, and each man, one by one, raised his hands to the cloudy sky. In unison, they prayed, asking for wisdom, strength, and Odin's guidance for the attack that was about to be made. Ivan, in a firm and respectful voice, spoke the words that had been passed down for generations in his clan. O great Odin, Lord of Valhalla, guide us in this last act. May our blade be true, may our mind be sharp as steel, and may the blood of our enemies not be spilled in vain. We, your sons, ask that you bless us with wisdom to take the city, but spare the innocent. May the justice we seek be served, and may your strength encompass us, for we are but men before your greatness. Night fell silently and heavily, as if the world awaited the unfolding of the events that were about to unfold. The rain, which had previously seemed like a distant promise, was now approaching rapidly, a thick curtain of water that covered the fields and mountains in a veil of darkness. The sky was lit up with intense lightning, as if Odin were indeed answering the prayer of Ivan and his men. When the first thunder rumbled, the sound seemed like a roar, a warning that something great was coming. The gathering storm, with its blinding lightning and torrential rain, was seen by Ivan as a blessing in disguise. The natural chaos would be his ally that night, obscuring the movements of the Viking clan and allowing them to attack with deadly precision. As the storm began to reach its peak, Ivan gave the order. The men were ready, their swords sharpened and their daggers in hand. The blanket of rain and lightning enveloped them, but there was no fear in the eyes of any of them. The darkness and the noise of the storm made the scene even more dramatic, but each of the 11 warriors knew what had to be done. They moved like shadows, silent and merciless. Ivan, with his unwavering leadership, showed the way. The city, imposing and secure in its belief that it had won, was unprepared for the onslaught that was coming. Every street, every corner, and every building was devoid of any warning, for no one had expected such a precise, brutal, yet stealthy strike. As they advanced, Ivan and his men took each guard with precision, leaving no room for resistance. They had been blessed by Odin, and the storm seemed to respond to the intensity of their mission. The blades cut through the enemies as if they were made of paper, and the bodies fell silently, without making a sound. Ivan's clan did not seek chaos for everyone, only for those who had tarnished the honor of their people. Innocents were spared, their homes respected, their lives preserved. Ivan's goal was clear: revenge, yes, but also justice. The city had made a mistake in underestimating the strength of the Viking clan, but Ivan was no monster. He knew right from wrong, and his anger did not blind his morals. The battle unfolded violently, but also in a controlled manner. Ivan's men, with their sharp fighting techniques and strategies, advanced without giving the city's defenders any room to reorganize. The walls were easily breached, the gates were forcefully broken down, and the city, once proud and imposing, began to feel the weight of its arrogance. But the final blow was yet to come. Ivan knew that as he led his men, the storm above them continued to intensify, as if Odin were guiding their every move. The sound of thunder seemed to be the Vikings' war cry, and the smell of rain mixed with iron and blood filled the air. With the last resistance of the city broken, Ivan stood in the center, his tireless gaze fixed on the horizon, where the city now fell before him. The fire, the destruction, but also the feeling that, somehow, justice was being served, was all that remained. He had accomplished his mission, but at what price? The bodies lying around, the empty looks of the men who had fought bravely and the innocents who had been spared, left an indelible mark on Ivan's soul. He knew the siege was over, but the cost had been high. With a last look at his warriors, he whispered, "Odin has guided us. Now, our honor is restored." After the final battle, silence fell over the city. The destruction was visible at every turn, but the fury of Ivan and his men, fueled by the divine power of Odin, had finally ended the siege. The city lay in ruins, but Ivan's clan, the Ravnaska, now had the chance to rewrite its history. With the death of his enemies, Ivan and his 11 men became the new rulers of Skjoldheim, taking what had once belonged to his enemies as a symbol of their victory. Ivan's power was based on strength, but also on the wisdom gained in hard battles, the sacrifices made, and the lessons Odin had taught him. The city, now under the rule of the Ravnaska, saw a transformation. The rigor of battles gave way to a firm but fair administration. Ivan and his warriors ruled with an iron fist, but never forgot to honor the values of the clan: loyalty, courage, and wisdom. The city rose again, but there was always the weight of the memory of the losses, the irreparable losses that marked Ivan's soul. However, He knew that true strength came from his ability to move forward, to learn from the past, and to ensure that the honor of the clan was preserved in every action taken. The future of Skjoldheim was now in the hands of Ivan and the Ravneska, but they knew that the road ahead would be full of challenges. New threats would come, new lands would need to be conquered, and perhaps new enemies, fiercer than the previous ones, would test the resistance of Ivan and his clan. But, as always, Ivan was ready to face whatever was necessary, with courage, wisdom, and the indomitable spirit of the Ravneska. And so, the saga of Ivan and his clan did not end. Skjoldheim was only the beginning of a journey that would still extend for many generations. The name Ravneska would resound throughout the lands, revered and feared, as the clan that dominated an empire and whose deeds would be sung by skalds in future sagas, immortalizing the name of Ivan, the unbeatable leader, and his clan, the Ravneska. The story was only just beginning, and the wind blowing in the sails of their next journey could already be felt in the distance. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.